What I fail to understand is that when a man has a high body count, right, his chance of pair bonding isn't damaged as much as when a woman's high body count, or when a woman has a high body count, it affects her chance of pair bonding. And this is something that I've always struggled wrapping my head around, because if you think about it, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, right? If your high body count is beyond, like, right up here, yeah, surely that would affect both the man and woman when it comes down to pair bonding. Because if you think about it, it was God's will that fixed this flaw within the law, technically speaking, which is polyamory for you women and polygamy for the men. Because under the law, back then, it was deemed perfectly healthy and perfectly biblical to have either more than one wife, and again vice versa for the women, having more than one husband. But if you were to go to God's will, you would actually begin to understand that this was actually in fact a flaw within the law, because it was God's will that rectified this flaw within the law, thus ultimately making one man eligible of having one wife, and again vice versa for the woman having one man. Now, many people are going to bash the way that I'm speaking because they're so caught up within their own degenerative ways that they actually think, they wholeheartedly think that they know as to what they're talking about and where they are going with their life, when in actuality they don't. Because if they did, they would read God's will and not the law. Now, can the law be used against itself in regards to fixing any flaws within it? Yeah, of course it can. Jesus Christ is actually in fact a living testimony to this. But it was God's will that fixed the flaw involving relations and marriage with both sexes, because the law corrupted the idea, or should one say the concept, of a man having multiple wives, and again vice versa for the women having multiple husbands, because it was the law that created this fundamental flaw where it's perfectly healthy to have, say, however many wives for the men and however many husbands for the women. But if you go back to God's will, you will know that as men and women, we were designed and created to be monogamous, because we are under God's will and not the law. And this is why there's so much confusion, and to put it frankly, so much frustration, along with only God knows what else, when involving the law, because people are following the law and the flaws that come with it, i.e. polyamory for you women and polygamy for the men even. We're not under the law, we are under the will. Therefore, if the gospel word, under God's will, clearly and evidently proves that as men we were designed and created to have one woman, that works for the woman as well, with one man. But no, that's not enough, is it? And this is why we have the mess involving marriage, better yet, relationships on a whole. Because people are never satisfied. They want more. They want more. More. In other words, their greed only intensifies within time. They're never satisfied with what they have. And this is why we have the mess that we have involving human psychology. And it's only going to get much worse before it gets any better. So people quit following the law and the fundamental flaw that comes with it of believing that you're perfectly healthy and are perfectly fine to have more than one woman for you men, and again vice versa for the women and you men, and your men, should one say, and start reading what the will of God evidently proves. Because it was God's will that fixed this fundamental flaw within the law. In other words, people are actually in fact under the law and not God's will. And this is why we have the mess that we have today. This is why we have the great collapse within marriage and marital figures, as you will, statistics, along with a sudden decline within child rate, births, as you will. Because more and more people are now beginning to realise that there is actually, in fact, a flaw within the law. Hence why we see a sudden spike in divorce rates. Involving both sexes. The only way for people to remove themselves from this flaw that they're so caught up within is by focusing on God's will and what God's will teaches. And what does it teach? Does it teach that as men and women we're to have multiple wives for the men and multiple husbands for you women? No. It evidently proves, however, that as men and women, under the will, we are to have one woman for the husband, as we are the head of the marriage, thus ultimately putting God above the marriage, and one husband for you women. But nowadays, people don't want that, because they're so caught up within the law and the fundamental flaw that it comes with, that it's almost like they love being greedy. They get sick joy out of it. They get a sudden burst of fake joy along with sinister joy from it, if that makes sense. Now, I don't know about any of you watching this video. The thought of my wife being shared with other men quite literally churns my stomach inside out. I mean, I don't want my wife to be shared with other men. And again, vice versa, why would you women out there want your husbands to be shared with more than one woman? If you had a common sense, or should I say, if you had a conscience and you had common sense, along with knowledge and wisdom, along with logic to go with that, you would actually begin to understand as to where I'm going with this whole thing. Start following what the gospel will of God created us to do, rather than paying attention to what the law and its fundamental flaws teach people to do. And there we have it, folks. Under the law, polygamy and polyamory, if that's how it's pronounced as, wasn't technically speaking punished with hell, but it was, however, punished according to the weight that it was dished. In other words, while it may not be punished with hell, it is technically speaking still punishable to some degree. It is frowned upon. And to the men, it can also be, or should I say, it can also provoke us onto jealousy, if that makes sense. Especially if our wife, like I said, has the urge to be with one man, or if she, what's the word I'm looking for, has it within her heart and mind that she wants to be with more than one man. That provokes us onto jealousy, it provokes us onto wrath. And again, any woman with a conscience, along with common sense, would also feel the same way, especially if she loved her husband, and only her husband. It's a wrap.